beyond. We'll explain. And when so many world leaders are in a huddle, how can Xi Jinping be left behind? He's cooking something in the Chinese city of Xi'an, hosting Central Asian leaders, as Russia watches warily. That's 3 summits and way too much diplomacy for a Friday. We also have news about Tesla. It wants to drive into India, but there are the old tax roadblocks. Did Elon Musk have a change of heart? What explains his India outreach after calling it a difficult destination for business? And in Spain, they're launching a new app to help track men doing their share of the housework. We say every country needs such an app. The headlines first. G7 tries to woo the global south. 8 more seats added to the table this year. Countries like India, Brazil, Vietnam, Indonesia, Comoros and the Cook Islands have been invited as Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida seeks a more global coalition than one dominated by the West. Will Beijing outlaw street vendors? Xi Jinping says he doesn't want them. At the same time, China is trying to revive small entrepreneurship as youth unemployment hits a record high. India's central bank withdraws the 2,000 rupee note from circulation. The note will continue as legal tender for now. The deadline to exchange it is September 30th, 2023. The RBI says this is part of their clean note policy. Rift between the Wagner Group and Russian military widens. Wagner chief attacks Moscow's top brass once again, accusing Russia of abandoning positions in Bakhmut. Ukraine, though, is making massive gains there in the battle for the eastern city. Iran executes 3 men over the anti-government protests last year. They were convicted over their alleged involvement in a shooting attack. Protesters say they went through unfair trials. 4 other anti-government protesters have been hanged since December. Weather emergencies declared across Europe. Torrential rains cause once-in-a-century floods in Italy. Bosnia and Herzegovina declare a state of emergency. Croatia, Slovenia and Austria are also experiencing heavy rainfall and floods. And did Mars once have long, raging rivers? NASA's Mars rover finds evidence to support this claim. The Perseverance rover captures new images. They reveal signs of a deep and powerful river on the red planet. Our lead story tonight comes from Hiroshima in Japan. The world's biggest leaders are gathered there. They're attending the G7 summit. The G7 is a group of 7, the richest countries in the world: the US, Japan, Germany, Britain, France, Italy and Canada. These are the members. Now, China and India are not the members, although their economies are bigger than some of these member countries in G7. You see, this group was created 50 years back, and since then, its membership has not been reformed much. There's been no revision. Even when the GDPs of countries like India and China have surpassed those of France, Italy and Canada. So they're still not members, and this is the G7 that we have. India, though, is attending as a guest, as an observer. It's been doing so for a while now. So the leaders of the G7 countries meet every year, apparently to discuss world economy. The summits are often mocked as lavish offsites for world leaders. This one, though, is in the news for being hijacked. By whom? Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. He's the wild card entry this time, and he's hogging the headlines. He'll go to Hiroshima in person, and he'll meet India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi there, the first meeting since the war began. And this has come out of the blue. Until yesterday, there was no word on Zelensky's attendance. Today it was announced. The Ukrainian leader is summit hopping. Today, he was in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia for the Arab League summit. From there, he'll head to Hiroshima. It's not clear when he'll land. They do not share too many details due to security concerns. But we understand he will be there on Sunday. And the very news of his arrival has upended the agenda of the summit. This meeting was supposed to be about inflation, about cost of living, about US debt ceiling crisis. Instead, it has become about Ukraine and Russia. It's turned into a war council of sorts. And the agenda has shifted. Now they'll discuss more sanctions on Russia and how to enforce them. Also, the proposal to provide F-16 jets to Kiev and the possibility of starting peace talks, all of it is expected to be discussed. And Ukraine is hoping for some big takeaways. Zelensky's team says some very important decisions could be taken in Hiroshima.
Very important things will be decided there, and it is therefore the presence of a president that is absolutely essential in order to defend our interests.
The G7 wants to build pressure on Russia. These countries are the biggest allies of Ukraine. Fun fact, this group had 8 members once. It was called the G8. Do you know who the 8th member was? Russia. It was expelled in 2014. What for? For taking Crimea from Ukraine. Crimea is a peninsula. It used to be part of Ukraine. 9 years back, Russia annexed it. So it was dropped from the G8. And now we have the G7. And this is a group on a mission to make Russia pay for invading Ukraine. They want to project a united front against the Kremlin. But it's not as straightforward as it seems. For starters, the G7 do not agree on a lot of things. Let me give you the latest example. Today, new sanctions were announced, and there were differences. Some wanted to push the boundaries, impose the toughest possible sanctions on Russia. Others wanted to be more cautious. The UK wanted to target Russian diamonds. They're a lucrative business. Russia is the world's 8th largest diamond exporter. In 2021, Moscow earned about $4.7 billion from this trade, the diamond trade. So far, diamonds have been kept out of the sanctions list, but London says it will ban them. The US wants to go one step further. It wants to ban all exports to Russia. But Europe is not ready for that. They've been part of at least 10 rounds of sanctions against Russia, but Europe still sends a lot of goods to Russia. This includes products like medicines, soap, coffee, cocoa, tea, toys, and dyeing liquids, among others. As of February this year, European apparel brands were also doing business with Russia. I'm talking about names like Boji, Benetton, Calzedonia, Eaton, and Lacoste. Earlier this week, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz spoke about this. He called for a quote-unquote pragmatic approach. In other words, an all-out ban is not feasible. What are the other options then? Reports say the G7 is considering a new proposal, something called the Traceability Initiative. It focuses on third parties. What are third parties? Countries that buy goods from Russia and sell them to the rest of the world. They're third parties. Now, we don't have the specifics yet, so we'll have to wait for the joint statement to shed light on what the plan really is. But if the G7 decides to target these third parties, it won't be good news for India. Prime Minister Modi, as we said, is in Hiroshima, not as a G7 member, but as an observer. His interventions will be watched closely. He'll meet the Quad leaders there. He'll meet Zelensky, of course. It'll be a test of India's diplomacy, how to navigate conflicting agendas, secure India's interests, and maintain strategic autonomy. This promises to be a busy weekend. We'll keep you posted. Every G7 leader has their work cut out, but none more than Joe Biden. He's physically in Hiroshima, but his mind must be in Washington. That's where the big debt ceiling talks are happening. Quick refresher. What exactly is the debt ceiling? There's a limit on how much the US government can borrow. That limit is called the debt ceiling. The US Congress sets this limit. Right now, the debt ceiling is $31.4 trillion. A lot of money, yes, but the US government has spent most of it. If the debt ceiling is not raised, they will run out of money, meaning no salary for government employees, no repayment of debt. In other words, a default. The US Treasury says time is running out, that Washington could default by the 1st of June. So Republicans and Democrats are hoping to strike a last-minute deal. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy sounded optimistic on Wednesday.
The only thing I'm more optimistic about, he finally agreed to something that every other time we've been able to solve a problem has worked. The structure of negotiations. I have the grit, the perseverance, and we're going to get it done.
The markets are hopeful too. US and European indices closed in the green on Thursday. But is a deal the end of it? Will things go back to normal overnight? Experts say they won't. We're talking about a major risk here. No one knows what a US default would even look like. Why? Because it's never ever happened before. So this is uncharted territory. Even if there's no default, there will be aftershocks. The question is, how big will it be? Wall Street says $1 trillion. Let me explain. The US Treasury is currently running out of money. It has around $95 billion in the bank. How much would it like to have? Around $550 billion by the end of June, $600 billion by the end of September. If the debt ceiling is raised, that can be achieved. But the process is dangerous. The Treasury will have to issue more bills than usual. It will have to raise a lot of money in quick time. And where will this cash come from? The private sector that buys the bills. The end result could be a major liquidity crisis. Let's try and understand with the help of an example. Imagine you and your friends are out for dinner. The restaurant's internet is out, so you'll have to pay by cash. Just one problem, though. You use UPI and don't carry a lot of cash. So you go around the table and you ask your friends. Everyone empties their wallet. Thankfully, there's enough money to pay the bill. The flip side, no one has liquid cash anymore. Your friend circle has run out of cash, has run out of money. That's what could happen in the US. The Treasury's rapid attempts to raise money could drain liquidity. What happens then? Fundings and loans could get more expensive. Bank of America says the impact will be similar to a quarter-point interest hike. That's 25 basis points. In normal times, this may not have been a problem. But in 2023 America, this could be disastrous. Interest rates are already high. They're 5% higher than in March 2022. So the US economy does not need another shock. But from the looks of it, there is no escape. Deal or no deal, there will be trouble ahead. And just to be clear, this wasn't some unavoidable crisis. This was perfectly preventable. Most countries in the world have debt ceilings, but they're not absolute amounts. They are percentages of the GDP. Like in the European Union, it's 60% of the GDP. But in the US, it's an absolute amount. What is the rationale behind this? Apparently accountability, to make sure no US president goes on a spending spree. It's a great idea, but for this idea to work, you need rational, responsible leaders. Unfortunately, the US has none. You have liberal leaders who want to overspend. You have conservatives who want to underspend. No one wants the middle ground. As a result, the debt ceiling has become weaponized. No one seriously believes the US will default, but even the remote possibility is too dangerous. So what's the solution? Ideally, just remove it. Australia did exactly that. They imposed a debt ceiling after the financial crisis of 2008. They faced the same problem as the US. So what did they do? They created bipartisan support to remove the ceiling in 2013. Well, that requires political maturity, something that American leaders seem to lack. The fact is, a government default is not a political matter. It's like national security. It's like nuclear policy. There must be multi-partisan agreement on it. But knowing the US, I wouldn't count on it. Syria's political exile is over. President Bashar al-Assad landed in Saudi Arabia on Thursday. He attended the Arab League summit in Jeddah. It reaffirms the old saying, anything is possible in politics. These same leaders and kings tried to topple him in the last decade. They banished him from the Arab League in 2011, but 12 years later, Assad is back.
It is important to leave internal affairs of the country's people as they are best able to manage their own affairs. There is an added hope amid the Arab as well as the Arab regional and international rapprochement brought in by this summit, which I hope will signal a new phase in Arab coordination and solidarity among us and peace and prosperity in our region instead of war and destruction.
So why is Bashar al-Assad back? We can think of three major reasons. Number one, because Assad is now a political reality. The civil war may not be over, but the regime in Damascus is secure. It is virtually impossible to topple Bashar al-Assad now. He controls most of the country, including the big cities in Syria. So the Arab League had two options. A, keep denying Assad's consolidated position, or B, start engaging with him. The League went with option 2. They're engaging with him. 13 out of 22 members voted to restore Syria's membership. It's not overwhelming, but the Arab League's big shots were on board. That's Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Reason number 2 why Assad is back is to counter Iranian influence. Tehran supported Assad's regime throughout the last decade. They gave him things that the Arab League did not: financial help, military assistance, political legitimacy. So the Arab countries are rushing to change course. They cannot afford another pro-Iran country in the region. Reason number 3 for Assad's re-entry: America's lack of interest in West Asia. Once the US left the region, the picture was clearer. The Arab countries had to sort out their own mess. Hence the move to restore Syria. Symbolically, it's huge. Arab countries have accepted that Assad is in charge of his country, that he is the legitimate ruler. But does this change anything on the ground? Assad does need political legitimacy, but what he needs even more is money. The civil war has battered Syria. Around half the population has fled their homes. 6 million have fled the country. The infrastructure is virtually non-existent. So Assad needs money to rebuild his country. How much money are we talking about? In 2019, a UN report said $250 billion. That's 4 times Syria's GDP before the war. 4 times. Another report in 2023 said they need $1 trillion. Iran doesn't have that kind of money, neither does Russia. That's Assad's other ally. Well, guess who does? The Gulf Arab states. Saudi Arabia and the UAE can easily foot this bill. One problem stands in their way, though. That's Western sanctions. The US and Europe have criticized Syria's readmission into the Arab League. They say the time is not right. So unless the sanctions are lifted, the money will not flow. It's only a matter of time, though. The Arab states have enough leverage over Washington, which means sanctions relief will happen at some point. I know Syria is the big headline at the moment in this summit, but there's a larger political story here. The Arab League has always been considered a failed organization, too divided, too powerless, too ineffective. But Saudi Arabia is hoping to change that. They've normalized relations with Iran. They've welcomed Syria back into the fold, and they seem lukewarm towards Israel. What do these moves signal? An acceptance of political realities. America's withdrawal seems to have liberated Arab policy, and Riyadh is taking the lead. They're pursuing twin policies on Iran. First, normalizing ties and opening lines of communication, and secondly, preparing a united Arab front. Riyadh knows only a united Arab world can take on Iran, and that is the big story here. An independent Arab world pursuing strategic autonomy. We saw another example of that today. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky was also in Jeddah. He attended the Arab League summit. Most of these countries have refused to condemn Russia's war. Some, like Syria, are in open support of Russia. Yet they invited Zelensky to attend their summit. Why is that? To tell Russia that lack of condemnation is not support. It's great how the tables have turned, really. The US and great powers used West Asia as their playground in the last century. Today, they are keeping the big powers guessing. The future is indeed multipolar. But try telling that to China. Beijing doesn't believe in multipolarity or division of powers. They want to be the top dog. Like all big powers before them, China is starting with the neighborhood. That's Central Asia. Xi Jinping is hosting a 2-day summit. Leaders from all 5 Central Asian countries are attending. Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan. All 5 are former Soviet states. Hence, all of them have traditionally been closer to Russia. Central Asia is often called Russia's backyard. But China wants to change that. So Xi Jinping is throwing a grand party in Xi'an. And the choice of the venue is important, the city of Xi'an. Xi'an was the easternmost point of the ancient Silk Route. It's no secret that China wants to revive it. The Belt and Road Project, BRI, is often billed as the new Silk Route. Either way, the events in Xi'an were grand. You had dance performances, songs from Central Asia, light shows. It was less of a summit and more of a charm offensive. Perhaps that was the idea all along. To show Central Asia the difference between China and Russia. One is stuck in Ukraine, the other is throwing lavish parties. But charm cannot replace substance. So Xi Jinping whipped out the checkbook as well. He announced a development project worth $3.8 billion.
There is a proverb popular among farmers in Shanxi province. If you work hard enough, gold will grow out of the land. In the same vein, a Central Asian saying goes, you get rewarded if you give, and you harvest if you sow. Let us work closely together to pursue common development, common affluence, and common prosperity, and embrace a brighter future for our 6 countries.
So why is Xi Jinping trying to snatch Russia's allies? There are 3 major reasons. Number 1, the location. Central Asia can be China's bridge to Europe. It's a key part of the Belt and Road project. Number 2, the resources. Central Asia is home to vast oil and gas reserves, around 31 million barrels of oil and 825 trillion cubic feet of gas. These resources could end China's dependence on ship-borne oil. China may not control the seas, but they could control the land routes over Central Asia. And reason number 3 is security. Peace in Central Asia is key to peace in Xinjiang. China has jailed around 1 million Uyghurs in the province. But they fear an insurgency. And Xinjiang borders 3 Central Asian states. So trouble there could mean trouble in Xinjiang. Until now, Russia was in charge of Central Asian security, but Moscow is busy in Ukraine now. Plus, how long can China count on another country? So Xi Jinping wants to take charge. He wants to make inroads into Central Asia. The question is, will those countries play along? They certainly need the money. China's investments could help them expand their infrastructure. They also need security guarantees. 3 Central Asian countries are treaty allies of Russia: Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. Russia is bound to deploy troops there if the governments request. That's the treaty. It has already done so in Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. Will China be willing to do the same, or even offer that? The fact is, historic alliances are hard to break. China may end up making inroads into Central Asia, but replacing Russia is going to take time. And don't forget, Central Asia has other options. In the month of March, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken visited the region. So did European Union President Charles Michel last year. Everyone is courting Central Asia. Where does that leave Moscow? Putin knows he can't beat the Chinese checkbook. So what does he do? He widens the competition pool. It was Russia that proposed India's membership in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or SCO. Now it wants Iran and Belarus to join. Do you see the strategy here? Russia is using other Asian powers to check China's influence. Nothing new, though. Every country does it, which is why Xi Jinping is betting on a direct approach. He says these Central Asian summits will be held every 2 years. The next one will be in 2025. Kazakhstan will be hosting it. If Putin and Xi are willing to share power in Central Asia, this wouldn't be a problem. But Putin doesn't seem like someone who shares. Let's not forget why he invaded Ukraine. So this summit may not signal a break in China-Russia ties, but it does expose the challenges. Vantage continues after a short break.
It's not a kind of currency denomination which is used very extensively. So they think that it's not going to cause so much of damage. Now, if you just step back in 2018, when the demonetization had come into place, there was a sense of panic. And that is because it was 500 rupee notes. All of those were also being withdrawn. The government has, after its calculation, come to a conclusion. And this is something which we were getting inputs from the finance ministry over the last couple of months, Daka, is that 2,000 rupee notes does not find much of resonance, not used very commonly. And also the fact is that it is not considered to be clean note, to use the finance ministry parlance.
And
Now let's talk about Elon Musk. He seems to be taking more interest in India. A few days back, he was praising Indian food. Now his car company Tesla is making moves here. Tesla wants to build a factory in India. They're reviving their India plans. Reports say the company has written to the government of India. It says Tesla is willing to make electric cars in India. They'll be sold in the domestic market. They'll also be exported overseas. Senior officials from Tesla have visited India, we understand. They've held talks with the government. They're exploring ways to operate here. Nearly 1 year ago, Tesla had abandoned its plans for India. It wrapped up its operations and left the country. Then why the change of heart? In fact, the change of strategy too. Earlier, they wanted to sell imported cars in India. But the import tax was too high. Tesla pushed, but Delhi did not budge. Elon Musk even took to Twitter to complain. It changed nothing. India said Tesla should manufacture in India. It would get subsidies and discounts if it does this. But Tesla just packed up and left. Now they've returned and are talking to the government. They're talking about setting up a factory, sourcing parts for cars in India, even making batteries here. The conversations happened earlier this week, and they're still in the initial stages. Reports say Tesla has not presented a concrete plan yet. It's looking for relief on tariffs, for less import tax on cars. But the government has refused any concession. This tax regime applies to all automakers. India won't make an exception for Tesla. If the company wants to be in India, they'll have to commit fully. So they're still negotiating. Tesla is reaching out to key ministries like the Ministry of Road Transport and Highways, Power and Heavy Industries. It doesn't help that Elon Musk is a mercurial leader. In the past, he's been critical of India. He said the Indian market is challenging and that import taxes are too high. In January last year, when asked about Tesla's plans for India, Musk said, and I'm quoting, "Still working through a lot of challenges with the government." He posted this on Twitter. It made a lot of waves. The taxes are more or less the same. What has changed, though, is the geopolitical situation. There is a war in Europe. Russia is under sanctions. Countries and companies are de-risking and decoupling from China. So everyone is looking for alternatives. Tesla will have to do the same. As of now, their biggest manufacturing hub in this region is in China. They have a factory in Shanghai. It produces 22,000 vehicles a week. But tensions remain high between the US and China. They're fighting a trade war. Washington is firing more sanctions at Beijing, so American businesses depending solely on China face newer risks. They must diversify. Tesla realizes this, hence the outreach to India. Last November, Elon Musk said he considers South Korea as a top candidate for investment. Then in January, Tesla turned to Indonesia. They're said to be close to a deal with Indonesia. They'll set up a factory there. The plan is to produce 1 million cars every year in Indonesia. Where does that leave India? It's a big market and an investment destination. But it's not clear what Tesla plans to do here. What is clear, though, is that Tesla must make in India to be able to sell in India. Now let's shine some light on the world of political corruption. No, this is not a Pakistan story. It's about the US. The US House of Representatives is investigating President Joe Biden's family to see if he's involved in corruption. And they've made a startling revelation, not about Biden, but his family. Apparently, they got millions of dollars from foreign entities, around $10 million according to the probe. When did this happen? When Joe Biden was the vice president of the US. Also, why is the US House investigating the president? Because it's controlled by the opposition. Here's a report.
US President Joe Biden's family is in the news again. It's not just Hunter Biden this time, but everyone from Biden's brother to his daughter-in-law. They're under investigation by the US House Oversight Committee. It's a group of lawmakers in the House of Representatives. It's now being headed by a Republican Party lawmaker. This is the Oversight Committee's chairman, James Comer, and he's come out with some shocking news. It turns out Biden's family members received around $10 million from foreign entities. This was while he was vice president under Barack Obama.
The bank records show the Biden family, their associates, and their companies received over $10 million from foreign nationals and their companies.
We should pause here and explain. The Republican Party has been after Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, for a while now. They seem convinced that he's up to something illegal and that Joe Biden has been helping cover up Hunter's wrongdoings. Remember the whole Hunter Biden laptop saga? That apparently his laptop contained evidence of Biden's corruption, especially regarding Ukraine? Well, 3 Republican-led investigation committees haven't been able to find proof of corruption for neither Joe nor Hunter Biden. But it hasn't stopped them from trying regularly. Like in this new case of Chinese firms paying Hunter Biden. The Republican lawmakers stressed on this.
Chinese nationals affiliated with the Bidens created limited liability companies in the United States and then in a short period of time transferred their interest to a Chinese company that sent money to the Bidens. This is not normal. Hunter Biden and his associates courted business in countries that correlated directly with Joe Biden's work as vice president.
Comer said this is not normal. He didn't say that this was illegal. That's because technically all of this is legal. But it does seem shady though. Biden's family members getting money from abroad, even from Chinese state-linked firms. But is there a legitimate reason? The Republicans don't think so. They don't have any proof that these foreign entities tried to influence Biden or that as vice president he did them any favors. But the belief is that it must have happened. Why else would they pay millions to Biden's family?
One thing everybody in this room and the American people definitely know is that the Biden family doesn't really have a business. There is no business structure around this family, except politics. And since Joe Biden has spent decades in the Senate, served 8 years as vice president, and is now president of the United States, and the family's getting money from various countries and foreign businesses through various shell companies and this web of LLCs. I mean, guys, you in the press, this is easy pickings. I'm giving you Pulitzer stuff here.
The Republicans don't really have the smoking gun yet. That's probably why they appealed to journalists in the room. Maybe they can succeed where the Republican Party has failed, because it seems they aren't going to rest until they nab the Biden family, Hunter in particular. And unexplained foreign funding really isn't helping the Biden family's case. Even if it is a witch hunt, perhaps it's better for Biden to go public with all the business dealings. If not, it will definitely be a Republican war cry in the 2024 presidential election.
50% and 15%. Similar sounding numbers, but they're obviously different. And for Spain, that has become a big problem. I'll explain. Their government held a survey. It was about unpaid work, routine activities like cooking, cleaning, childcare. Both men and women participated in this survey. About 50% women said they do most of the housework. What about men? 15%. It's a stark disparity, but it's not shocking. We'll tell you why, but first let's tell you what Spain is planning to do about it. They're trying to solve this old-school problem with a modern-day tool, an app. They're launching an app for household chores. You can divide housework among members of your family and monitor who is doing what. A lot like those expense-sharing apps that we all use. Except here, men and women can log in the hours they spend doing housework. How will it help? The government says it will make the division equitable, because when you see a problem, it's hard to turn a blind eye. The idea seems interesting, but does Spain like it? The response has been mixed so far. Some people are angry and offended. The government says that's because they'll have to start doing their share of the work. Others have welcomed this app. And this is a big deal in Spain because unpaid work is a major issue there. It has led to legal battles. Divorce cases are being settled with huge bills. Men are being asked to pay for years of unpaid work to their ex-wives. In 2017, a man had to pay about $25,000 for the same. Earlier this year, a man was asked to pay some $220,000, that's more than 1.7 crore rupees, for unpaid housework. How do they arrive at these numbers? On the basis of minimum wage. Had these women been paid a minimum wage for the work they do at home, this is the money they would have earned. And Spain is taking this very seriously. We say kudos to them and are learning for the rest. Because the problem of unpaid work is not limited to this country. Around the world, men and women spend their time differently. Men spend more time working for money. Women work, but often do not get paid for it. And this is not a general assumption. It's backed by data. On average, women spend about 5 hours a day on unpaid housework, while men spend just an hour doing housework. Women also do 76% of all unpaid care work the world over, 76%. These numbers are a world average. Country-wise, they look very different. In some countries, men and women share the load more equitably, like Sweden, Denmark, Norway, Canada, and Finland. Here, too, women work more, but about 1 hour more than men on doing daily chores. Elsewhere, the picture looks grim, like in Japan, Mexico, Portugal, Turkey, and India. In all of these countries, women spend over 3 hours more than men on chores. In India, the number is 5 hours. That amounts to 1,825 hours in a year. Let me repeat that. In India, women do household work for over 1,800 hours, more than men, every year. That's a lot of time and effort spent on unpaid work. And the value of this work remains largely invisible to economists. It is not part of GDP calculations. It is not used to measure economic growth. It is also difficult to value. But today, let's try to put it in terms of money. In 2019, if women earned minimum wage for their unpaid work, they would have earned about $11 trillion the world over. $11 trillion. It's more money than the 50 biggest companies of the world made that year combined. So basically, it's a lot of money. Even in cases where both men and women have a day job, it's the women who do more housework. Even when women earn more money than their male partners, they do more housework. Among retirees, women do more housework. Among the non-employed, take a wild guess, women do more housework. I can literally turn this into a poem or a rap even, whatever you prefer. Because this is my only point. the quiet cost of unpaid work. And this is not just about lost money, it's also about high rates of burnout, stress, depression, anxiety, insomnia, and other such problems among women. And no, housework is not the only reason for those problems, but it adds to them. So what can you do? Well, share the load and spread the message at a personal level, at a policy level, like the chore distribution app in Spain, or China's legal right to seek compensation for unpaid work, or Sweden's parental leave policy, or Denmark's subsidized daycare policy. These are all good first steps. But governments can do a lot more to address the issue of unpaid work, to help us see this invisible work and assign it the value that it deserves. Think about it. If the UK's parliament were a rapper, it would probably say something like this: I've got 99 problems and my home's the latest one. Because the UK parliament just added a new problem to its long list of issues. It now has a structural problem. No, I'm not talking about bickering parliamentarians. I'm referring to the very structure of the parliament. It is the seat of British democracy, a UNESCO site, hailed as an architectural masterpiece, which has, quote-unquote, a real and rising risk of destruction. Because it is crumbling and leaking, it has a perpetual threat of fire, also a clear risk of history repeating itself. What am I talking about? Our next report tells you.
This is Britain's Parliament building, the Palace of Westminster, located in central London. Built in the 19th century, visited by 1 million people per year, a UNESCO site, often called an architectural marvel. Lots of random facts about this Gothic building, right? You must be wondering why we're giving you an information overload. We're simply trying to prep you for a dark twist. Because while this parliament was built to hold the UK together, now its own building is coming down. The UK parliament is crumbling, leaky, and at a constant risk of fire. With 44 fire incidents since 2016, its pipes are bursting and it's dropping masonry. Yes, chunks of the building are literally falling off. Electrical systems were last updated in the 1940s, and the building is riddled with asbestos, which is a building material. It was popular in the early 1800s, not so much anymore. Because it's hazardous to health. Inhaling it can cause lung diseases like cancer, and this asbestos is present in about 2,500 locations in the building. All of this and more has recently come to light in a hair-raising report released by the British House of Commons. And it says that a catastrophic event will destroy this building before long-delayed restoration work is done. By the sounds of it, this issue is pretty urgent, a burning issue to avoid a literal fire, if we may say so. Question is, will the UK pay heed to this report? Because, as you can tell, the damage is big, vast, and there's nothing new about it. There have been several warnings before, and there was also renewal work, but it's painfully slow. And it's mostly limited to patching up the place, which is done at about $2.5 million a week. Then there's also been a lot of back and forth. In 2018, lawmakers finally voted to move out of the building. They were going to do it by mid-2020 to make way for years' worth of repairs. But there is no certainty, because lawmakers don't want to move. Last year, a body was set up to oversee the repairs, but it was scrapped. So while the dithering continues, the building grows more decrepit. Some don't want to leave this historic building with its riverside terrace and subsidized restaurants. And some lawmakers are worried about the public's disapproval towards a multi-billion-dollar bill of repairs, especially when people in the UK are struggling to make ends meet. But if they continue to wait, what's about to come will be even more costly to the taxpayers, because history is not without warnings. This parliament's predecessor was destroyed in a fire in 1834. If that isn't enough, the Britons could learn from the 2019 fire in France's Notre Dame. So there are surely warnings, both in history and in lengthy reports published by Parliament committees, out of which this week's report is the most urgent. Hopefully, the lawmakers will see it that way, and if they're still struggling, here's a helpful Friday night tip for them. If it's money the lawmakers are trying to save, wasting time and avoiding action is never value for money.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. We're starting with Italy, where a 2-year-old toddler was rescued after being stranded in a flooded building. Tens of thousands of South Korean nurses went on strike after a law to improve their pay was vetoed. And Japanese activists held protests against the G7 Leaders' Summit in Hiroshima. Now, what makes the 19th of May significant? We're taking you back in history to the year 1571. On this day, in 1571, the city of Manila was established by a Spanish explorer named Miguel Lopez. Today, Manila is the capital of the Philippines. We're leaving you with these images. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on Monday.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi's voice will become very, very crucial, talking about the roadmap in view of energy security, in terms of economic security as well. Do you think it's important to remember Gandhi, particularly in these times? These are troubled times for the world.
Well, he is a very, very great person, and he is a historical great person of the world. So Japanese people learn when they're in elementary school. We learn about him in junior high school, and he did very no violence, no resistance, and many times he got into jail, but he didn't stop it. So he is very great and make India a wonderful place. And now for Japanese people, his statue will come to Hiroshima. It will be a very big point for peace, I think.
And do you think it's important to talk about what Gandhi stood for in these times?
I think so.
In the backdrop of Russia-Ukraine war?
Well, I think that's the same. No violence, no weapon. I won't make them feel, take them back, they're peaceful. So I hope so.
This is the International Media Center inside the G7 venue. You can see journalists from all across the world present to try and get details on what will be the big takeaways from this G7 summit, which is happening in Hiroshima. Journalists who are filing stories and perhaps even sending directly. You can see there is the research groups also that are present here. This is Japan, the Hiroshima summit, a historic turning point is what Julia and her team is saying. Julia, hello. You're calling it a historic turning point because of the significance of the city, Julia?
Yes, for sure. I think it was an excellent choice to pick Hiroshima.
A very good evening. You're watching Breaking on News 18 with me, Akanksha Swaroop. Let's dive into the news segment with the top story that we are tracking this hour. The politics over RBI's announcement has been escalating after Congress, the Samajwadi Party, the TMC and even the Aam Aadmi Party have now trained their guns at the centre. Akhilesh Yadav, Mamata Banerjee and Kejriwal have taken to Twitter and said that the governance does not run arbitrarily but wisely and honestly. They have all taken to Twitter to, in fact, condemn the government's move. This is, of course, coming in soon after the RBI's announcement arrived today that the withdrawal of 2,000 rupee currency notes from circulation will happen by September of this year. For more details, let's quickly go across to our political editor, Pallavi Ghosh, on the phone line. Pallavi, important to put this into context. What is the opposition saying? Why are they demanding justification?
So first, from what the government is saying and what the RBI is saying, there is no need to panic. It is just continues to remain as a legal tender. Only thing is that because the lifespan had finished, it is now being withdrawn. You can still go and deposit the entire amount. There's no ceiling on that. The ceiling is only if you want to exchange your 2,000 rupee note. That's one thing which the government is making it very clear, and that it is not demonetization. Opposition refused to buy this because they are saying that when it was first introduced post the demonetization of 2016, we had objected to 2,000 rupees by saying that it's not going to help in curtailing black money. So why is it that the government bought it? And after that, now it's withdrawing it in the name of controlling black money. That's one. Second, according to the opposition, it's only going to give rise to a panic reaction because there are traders, there are people who do have the 2,000 rupees which they save up and use that as a transaction. This is going to lead to a needless panic situation. And the opposition says this is yet another case of a wrong measure, insensitive and callous one on behalf of the government.
All right. Many thanks to you, Pallavi, for putting that into context for us. And with that, let's in fact move into some more breaking inputs that are coming. This is with regards to structural changes that might take place in the national capital. We are now learning that the centre has brought fresh ordinance to substitute the Supreme Court judgment in Delhi versus the centre power tussle. As per the new ordinance, the National Capital Civil Service Authority or the NCCSA will be set up. The ordinance says that the NCCSA will have Chief Minister, Chief Secretary, even the Principal Home Secretary of Delhi. All matters to be decided by majority of votes of the committee members. For more details, I'm joined in by Ananya Bhatnagar on the phone line. Ananya, is this the centre again trying to have the last laugh?
Well, definitely. The centre is, this is a big development that has taken place days after the Supreme Court had given the powers to the Delhi government. It is a structural change that has been brought to in by the central government through an ordinance. And now what this ordinance basically says, I'll break it down for you. Number one is that there will be authority that would be called the National Capital Civil Servants Authority that would be set up, headed by the Chief Minister of the National Capital Territory of Delhi, would also have other members, including in fact, the Home Secretary of Delhi, the Chief Secretary of Delhi, and in fact, the CM as the chairperson. But interestingly, this committee will decide all of this would be done by a vote share. The majority of votes would be deciding any kind of a posting and transfer. And this recommendation would then go to the Lieutenant Governor of Delhi. Now, what has been a structural change is also that in the Act, the word aid and advice has been substituted with regards to the LG's power, has been substituted and has been said that in his own discretion, which basically means that the Lieutenant Governor of the National Capital Territory of Delhi would have maximum powers. He can take a decision, though he will have to take an aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. But the final decision, the supreme decision, would be of the Lieutenant Governor. And definitely this is a big blow to that Supreme Court judgment. It had that Supreme Court judgment comes standing down with this particular ordinance that has come in and how much does this sustain, whether politics happens on it or not, or whether this is challenged before the Supreme Court is something that is a matter of time we'll get to know.
Absolutely, Ananya. On that note, I'll also quickly go across to Arunima, who's also on the phone line with us. Arunima, going through that ordinance, could you focus on those key takeaways that in fact reiterate what Ananya was saying in terms of how the LG will in fact be only cushioned via this ordinance?
While the central government could negate criticism by saying that, the chief minister of Delhi will also be part of the decision-making body, the very fact that the decision will ultimately be taken by majority vote makes it very clear as to who will be ultimately prevailing when it comes to a contentious issue. Because who are all, as per, if you read section 45, what this goes on to say that there shall be an authority called the National Capital Civil Services Authority, and then it goes on to detail as to who will be the members. The Chief Minister, of course, the Chief Secretary, the Principal Home Secretary, and the Principal Home Secretary of the National Capital Territory. And then it goes on to say all matters required to be decided by the authority shall be decided by majority vote of the members present and voting. Now, the contention here is that if there are going to be two bureaucrats whose appointment and whose transfer is owed to the central government, and then there is a chief minister. So then the dice could be loaded in favor of the view that the central government would have. That was the bone of contention all along, that the government, the Delhi chief minister, was being overruled by the LG. The aid and advice of the chief minister was not being followed. So this ordinance is an attempt to find a way around that. Right. Now, it will become a law as and when it is brought before the parliament. But will this be challenged before the apex court also? That is what one has to wait and see.
In fact, that's a very crucial and significant point that you've made, that will this be challenged at the apex court or not? Akash, I want you to focus on the political dimensions of this news story, because remember, it was just yesterday, in fact, that we were learning that Arvind Kejriwal has alleged that the centre is plotting to reverse the Supreme Court order that had arrived with regards to the Delhi government officials' transfer out.
In fact, today we saw a whole lot of drama outside the LG office. First, a kind of dharna by Aam Aadmi Party, then the anticipation that central government will be bringing ordinance, and then, of course, the time was given and they met LG, and then, they came out and put several sort of allegations on different officers. But as of now, this is what has happened, because this is what Aam Aadmi Party was in fact anticipating, that now the central government would be bringing some sort of ordinance to amend or to nullify or to override what has been the order that has been given by Supreme Court. As of now, my colleagues Ananya and Arunima have pointed out the operative part of the particular ordinance, where